following is paid programming. Welcome to Something More with Chris Boyd, certified financial planner practitioner and founder of Asset Management Resources, LLC, a registered investment advisor firm. We call it Something More because we like to talk not only about those important dollar and cents issues, but also the quality of life issues that make the money matters matter. Here he is, your fulfillment facilitator, your partner in prosperity, advising clients across the country, your host, J. Christopher Boyd.
Welcome to Something More with Chris Boyd. I'm Chris Boyd. Thanks for being with us. I'm joined by two of our team members from Asset Management Resources. My co-host is Jeff Perry, and our guest is Scott Birmingham, our lead financial planner from Asset Management Resources. Thanks for being here, Scott. Particularly, Jeff, you're here regularly, so thank you. But
you don't have to say thanks, Chris. I'm always hanging around. Yeah,
appreciate it. So, Scott, we wanted to have a chance to talk to you about our recent webinar we offered to our clientele. And man, you carried a lot of the heavy stuff when talking about the financial planning that people do in the Retirement Redzone, which is the time that we're thinking that 5-year period, roughly, maybe as people are approaching retirement, a lot to think about and a lot to get ready for. So maybe we can talk a little bit about some of that.
Sure, you're all right, Chris. I did carry it. I was kind of the Steph Curry.
Whole thing.
Yeah. You were definitely the star of the show because you handled the issues that people tuned in to listen to the most. Meaning,
I think so.
Do I have enough money for this?
Yeah,
Sure.
That is the number one thing people think of when they're thinking about, got a few years to retirement, or I'm just about to retire. Can I do this? Can I do this long term? And you were pretty creative with your presentation, bringing in an old sitcom as well. Tell the listeners about your approach.
I just thought it'd be better to have kind of a case example. I mean, it's easier if you can relate to people and scenarios and what they're trying to accomplish. And so I use the old Ross and Rachel scenario as my example.
From Friends.
It's hard to believe they're getting close to retirement in our scenario anyway.
You said that they were 58. Is that accurate?
No, I just threw that out
okay.
there.
Yeah.
It might be well, actually, they're probably older, is my guess. Actually,
well,
everyone listening, Ross, has worked since then. But
everyone listening now is Googling how old is David Schwimmer and Jennifer Aniston, right?
Yeah.
Including our CEO.
I'm looking it up right
now. So Scott, tell us for listeners who want to actually look at the webinar and not just hear us joke about it. It is on our website. It's on the homepage of amrfinancial.com. You can go there. It's about an hour and a half long. We covered 4 different areas. Certainly, the highlight of this segment of this episode is the segment on income. So, Scott, why don't you continue to tell us how you approached it?
Sure. So I kind of laid out a timeline of someone actually coming in, say 5 years prior to retirement, because that would really be optimal. I mean, I want to stress that rather than coming in, a month before retirement and us scrambling. And there's a lot of things you can do 5 years prior to retirement. So we started out talking about things you can do prior to. So we were talking about catch-up contributions. Can we maximize the years prior to retirement by maybe saving a little extra? So we covered things like 401ks, IRAs. If you're self-employed, simple IRA. If you have a high deductible health plan, we covered HSA. So that was kind of our first kind of starting point. You got, 5 years of retirement. What can we do to kind of max things out dollar-wise savings? And then we kind of went through different discussion points that we're going to have as you roll into retirement. When you can take Social Security, what works best for you.
That's a big one. That's a big question for everyone. Yeah.
People are always surprised so we'll actually pull it up on the screen when we're sitting down in meetings, and we'll play around with different options, and they're surprised the effect it has if they can wait. Not everybody can wait and get delayed and get that annual boost when you wait past age 67. But I think most people are surprised the effect it has, especially if you have longevity in your family. And then we covered things like pensions, which, as I said in the webinar, it's not normal these days, but we still have clients rolling in with pensions, and there's a lot of decisions around that.
Well,
Lump
Jeff
sum.
sees this with
Yeah,
people in the
sure.
public sector, and
I see that. Yeah.
yeah.
Many of my clients are former government employees or people who maybe worked or still working in government, and that's a big decision on what option you went over the different options, but it's a big decision whether or not to protect your spouse, when to take it. Some people delay, and these questions are super individual, Scott, as you talked about.
They are, and it requires a lot of extra planning for us to run different scenarios to see what's comfortable for you and what's optimal for you and protecting your spouse should there be an early demise. And everybody's different. Somebody wants a lump sum, somebody wants to take it in kind of in an annuity form, but what works out best? What's your payout ratio? Things like that. So it's a big discussion point, and I love seeing the pension. I think if you have a pension, then you can do different things with your investments, maybe get a little more aggressive. So everybody's different. So I had to run through that. And then, of course, we're talking investments. It wasn't the focus of the chat, but we're talking about drawdown rates, how we draw money from your portfolio, what's realistic to expect to draw from your portfolio, which we're talking about the 4% rule, which is the basic. If you retire at 65 and you take 4% a year, you can comfortably feel that might last you for your lifetime. So the scenario was you have $1 million. You can take about $40,000 out of the portfolio and expect it to last if you have some longevity. Again, it's just a little thumbnail type scenario.
Yeah,
But it's
let's talk about that just for a minute. That's designed for original people at age 65, a couple, and the way the 4% rule is articulated in its origins is the idea that as the portfolio goes up and down, you'd alter it to 4% of that changing number. And I just don't know that that's the way people actually apply that, and the idea was not that you'd still have your original principal intact necessarily,
Right.
but you wouldn't run out of money over your lifetime.
Right.
You might be spending down some of that principal when you have market downturns by virtue of continuing to pull money out when markets are down. You have eventual gradual expectation of some erosion. That there's been some discussion about whether that should be a 3% rule in the current environment.
Sure.
People living longer, interest rates have been lower, and so forth, right? Periods where markets have underperformed at certain times, the early 2000s as an example. So in any case,
It also presumes a level of risk that you maintain. I mean, you can't put this in a fixed income portfolio and expect it to survive. I think correct me if I'm wrong, Chris or Scott, isn't the presumed model 50-50?
I think it is something along those lines. So yeah, the either 60-40 or 50-50 was the design. So yeah, I think you're right. The reality is, and Scott talked about this in yesterday's program, that with regard to the webinar, that oftentimes people's risk tolerance diminishes over time, and this is, I think, where you're going with that, Jeff. So that our programming, when we do modeling and forecasting for clients or people who are coming in, we identify a sort of a trajectory where they're likely reducing their exposure to market risks over time. And that's probably more realistic, although the program does it in a very graduated way. Most people, it happens sporadically. They get to after a certain number of years, they start to say, maybe I want to take a little less risk, and they make some adjustments within their portfolio from time to time. But in any case, yes, Scott, go ahead. Sorry.
No. I think that was good clarification, because I think I run into a lot of dividend lovers who say I'm getting 3 or 4% on my, my dividend stocks, my holdings, and I'm good. It's going to pay out that, and I can leave the rest of the kids. They just don't factor in the inflation piece well enough, and
Right.
And how it whittles away, and how their risk might alter over the years. So, yeah, it's good to point out.
Yeah, and I think most people aren't really willing to radically change their cash flow. Oh, it's a bad year in the market. I guess I'll have to not take as much income. No, I don't know. That some people may, but I think most people don't think that way.
No.
They think, well, I still need my $40,000 in that scenario, and they take it year in, year out, and maybe increasingly so, because they take the $40,000, but then maybe markets go down, markets go up, whatever happens. But and gosh, we do need a car, and there's an additional purchase that happens sporadically, or whatever, you know what I mean, whatever it might be. And so there can be instances where if people aren't very deliberate about the planning, it can be problematic.
Well, I think that's just another stressor for coming in annually to take a look at things. And yeah, you're not going to change your fixed expenses, but maybe you can hold off on some of those variable expenses.
Yeah,
when
maybe the car can wait until next year, or maybe those home remodel or whatever it might be can be pushed another year off, as an example.
Yeah.
I want to go back to, you were talking about pensions. Do you mind just if we kick some of these around, and we can come back to all that you covered? But Social Security and pension, I'd love to talk a little bit about each of these. We've talked about Social Security quite a bit, I think, on the show in many instances, and somewhat counterintuitive that oftentimes if you expect to have long life, unless you have some reason to think you have a challenge to your mortality, that you might be better served. It's kind of counterintuitive that not taking your Social Security right away will actually allow you to have more money left over later on. And it's counterintuitive because you end up spending more of your money in that period that you're waiting to turn on the Social Security. But ultimately that tends to be the case, not always the case, but tends to be the case for people to consider. And we talked about some of those issues, and spouses being part of that calculation. It's not if there's a married couple, it's not just the individual's lifespan. It might be if they're the larger breadwinner, this will affect both of the partners in the marriage and so forth. Let's turn our attention a little bit to the pension topic, because I think, just to elaborate, there's a lot of considerations that people need to be thinking about when examining how to deal with a pension. Should I opt for a lump sum? Should I opt for a lifetime income? What if I opt for a lifetime income? How do I include the spouse? If I'm married, do I include fully 100%? Do I do some reduced amount? And talk a little bit about some of these decisions and how people navigate them. What are some of the things that people should think about? And Jeff, you, I'm sure, want to chime in as well. But Scott, let me have you start off.
Well, having seen scenarios where a spouse was left out of a pension scenario and the effect that can have, I'm always leaning towards at least leaving a percentage to the surviving spouse. But we would obviously run some illustrations where it's very obvious. So we can run in the different numbers. Obviously, a higher amount if you were to not include your spouse, and the lower amounts as you slowly include your spouse for percentages, say 75% or 50%, whatever it may be.
Right.
And showing the fact if, what would happen if someone would pass away next year and that pension was either disappearing or lowering. How does the surviving spouse handle that? Do they have enough assets? Do you have some insurance? And that might be a solution in some cases, to actually get some insurance to cover that pension that disappears.
I mean, that is a technique often people consider as sort of this concept of pension maximization, the idea of I'll self-insure, the idea being that if I do it through the pension, and maybe self-insure isn't the right term, but I'll actually use an insurance product as a way to replace that income. If I do it through the pension income and we both die young, that money is gone, and there's no benefit to our estate, to our heirs. So sometimes when people still want that pension income arrangement, they might still commit the cost of what it is that they would be giving up by including the spouse. But instead of doing it through the pension, they might opt to do something through an insurance policy in the event that one, they both live a long time, and they could either opt whether they want to keep the policy later in life or whether they want to drop it, or two, they could have that be a benefit to their heirs in the end. But the math of that has to be done in a very particular way. Too often people think of using term insurance instead of permanent coverage, and that doesn't necessarily satisfy the challenge that may occur.
Chris and Scott, I've done this a couple of times. I did it for myself when I retired from the state. My own option of choosing to add my wife Lisa or not. I did this insurance calculation, and it wasn't a good choice for us. But I also did it for someone else, a client, and it's a different scenario. So if this is in your situation and you're thinking about it, don't rely on what someone else's situation may have been the answer to. It's very unique.
It's very true.
It's very unique.
There are other considerations. If you have idle money, that's not really productive, you can maybe use some of that to make it more cost efficient and more productive. You have to think about complications of, does this impact other benefits like health insurance or a variable of a variety of other considerations. But
it can definitely affect your health insurance and what you pick. Yep.
Yeah, right. And also, if you're not in good health or if you're in great health, these are complicating factors that can have a determination as to whether or not it's even viable to think of using insurance as a technique as opposed to a pension. But look, so coming back to the more broad concept, putting the insurance aside, I agree with you, Scott, that I'm having seen people who have chosen the larger amount, thinking, well, we'll take the larger amount, we won't include the spouse. We really need that income was the mindset. But then leaving the spouse without material impact of what was part of their income, that just disappears, and the consequence of that can be dramatic and problematic for people, the surviving spouse. So having seen that happen and some of the challenges that can create, we generally would prefer people to have some inclusion with the spouse for that benefit. I've also seen, like say teachers or people with two pensions, he takes the full amount and she takes the full amount as an example, thinking, well, we'll each have our own pension later in life. And that may be true, but again, you got to model this to say, if this happens quickly, one of you passes, how's it play out? You have half the income you were planning to have, and that, or maybe it's not literally half, but you follow my point. It changes the numbers. When do you think, you look like you were about to say something, Scott. I don't want to interrupt. I was moving on to a question for you.
You just brought up that scenario, and then it made me think of, what if they are heirs? I feel like you're giving up too large amounts of money, possibly, if there's early demise for both. So that, I think that's kind of an issue.
Yeah, it's a great point. Talk about the decision about when to think about lump sum versus not a lump sum.
I mean, I think we've seen some payout ratios for some pensions that are pretty high. So that kind of leaded us to kind of look at that a little more deeply. Another issue, I think, is who's paying that pension. Do you feel comfortable that the pension is going to be around for the next 20, 30 years? Is it the state of Chicago, and where I always hear there's bad things with their pension systems? So that's an issue. And then I think the big one is are you Are you the type of person that just wants a paycheck you cannot live? Are you a conservative type?
Yeah, that's a big part
your,
of it, isn't it? Your
yeah,
mindset, the desire for absolute versus the desire for what the potential could be, right? There's
right.
different prioritization, and it can be affected by how much you spend and what else you have covered. There can be a variety of considerations, but yeah, I think that you hit on it. How much that payout can be, if it's outsized benefit, it can be more attractive to consider. And if you're someone who says, well, I know I want to invest with risk.
I know we did an analysis last year for a longtime client who just was assuming I'm just going to take the pension and didn't really want to discuss it. And then we had a couple of meetings about it. And when we ran, he got us the numbers for the lump sum. It was such a dramatically different outcome of success in his retirement plan. He didn't even consider the pension afterwards.
Yeah.
That's
So
really
I
the
think-
key point in here, is that you can't rely on assumptions that you have. You really have to work with someone that you trust and run the actual numbers and project it out, as we've talked about, project it out for the rest of your life and see which one is a better choice. Sometimes it's a clear choice and sometimes it's not, but you owe it to yourself to do the homework.
True.
Yeah, great point. So taking us back to the Retirement Redzone webinar that we put on for our clientele, and it's available for anyone who'd like to learn more. You can go to our website, amrfinancial.com. Scott, I don't think we got through all of the parts of your presentation. You also talked about catch-up provisions, and what were some of the just highlights? What were some of the other parts that we might have hit on?
We were covering Social Security, so earliest eligibility, full retirement age. We kind of went over the details of what percentage you would lose if you were to take it early versus what bonus or credit you would get if you were to wait, and the effects on those. In more detail, we covered drawdown strategies, kind of a classic approach versus maybe taking pro rata. So kind of those details. So yeah, there was a lot of information.
Yeah, very good. And we'll talk more about this in another episode with other team members on what they covered.
Chris, I do have something that our listeners just need to know. Before
I was going to mention it too. Go ahead. I know where you're going with this. Ross and Rachel's current age.
All right, you missed it by a couple of years, Scott. Ross is 56, and Jennifer, Rachel, I'm going to get their real names mixed up, is 54.
Really? Okay.
Mm-hmm. So just a little bit younger.
I don't know if you guys have been watching her Apple TV series, but I assumed with all the stretching and makeup and stuff that she was a lot older.
Oh, we're not going to send this to her now. I was hoping she'd be a client, but not after that.
Yeah. Lisa Kudrow is age 60, I saw. I hope she doesn't mind us telling.
Well, they should all come in for a
59 for Courtney Cox, is it?
A consultation as they are in or approaching the retirement red zone.
The guys are in the 56, 54 range, it seems like, the other two. So anyway, all right, our questions are answered. Catching up with old friends. In any case, thanks guys for helping out with this. And if you have any questions when it comes to thinking about your financial planning or portfolio management, don't hesitate to reach out to Asset Management Resources. We can be a resource for you, and we're happy to do that. Thanks for listening this time. Until next time, keep striving for something more.
For listening to Something More with Chris Boyd. Call us for help, whether it's financial planning, portfolio management, insurance concerns, or those quality of life issues that make the money matters matter. Whatever's on your mind, visit us at amrfinancial.com or call us toll free at 866-771-8901 or send us your questions to radio@amrfinancial.com.
You're listening to Something More with Chris Boyd, Financial Talk Show.
Asset Management Resources, LLC, and J. Christopher Boyd, CFP, provide investment advice on an individual basis to clients only. Proper advice depends on a complete analysis of all facts and circumstances. The information given on this program is in the nature of general financial comments and cannot be relied upon as pertaining to your specific situation. AMR, LLC cannot guarantee that using the information from this show will generate profits or ensure freedom from loss. Listeners should consult their own financial advisors or conduct their own due diligence before making any financial decisions.